Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is Jackson Mummy, and let me be among the first to say happy 2017 to you. We're so glad and honored that you're spending part of your day with us, and certainly looking forward to a good 2017. Certainly would hope that all of you who are listening today would be able to see your names on the bar pass list in the upcoming year. This is our first episode for the new year, and I'm excited to share some ideas with you. We've got a lot of interesting stuff coming up this year on the podcast. I have a lot of things we'd like to do, but I've really been so grateful and excited to see the growth of this podcast. The number of subscribers just continues to grow and grow, and I hear from people all the time who say, well, I've heard you talk about something on the podcast, and that's always kind of gratifying to know that people are out there and listening and hearing and responding to what we're talking about. So we've got a great year planned for you on the podcast. And if you're new to us, welcome. We're glad to have you with us. You can always go and check our past episodes at celebrationbarreview.com. There's a link at the top that says podcasts, and you will find all of the past episodes and all of the show notes. So I encourage you to do that if you've not subscribed yet. And if you are a regular subscriber, well, welcome back, and we're glad to have you with us. Now, before we jump into today's discussion, we're going to be talking about what I call the house always wins, and I'll explain that in a moment. But I want to invite all of you that are listening today to join me for a special live masterclass this Thursday, January 5th at 3 p.m. Eastern. The masterclass is titled How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. We're going to look at the 4 steps that you need to follow in order to pass the test. And it's a masterclass we've been offering for a while now. It's totally free, but you do need to register in advance. And you can do that by going to our website at celebrationbarreview.com. You'll see a button on the site there where you can sign up and reserve your seat. And if for some reason you're unable to join us on Thursday, maybe that date's passed or the time's not convenient for you, again, it's 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. There's another button on that front page just below that allows you to schedule your own version of an on-demand class of the same material. So you can click on either one of those buttons and get scheduled and watch the video on your schedule, or you can join us live on Thursday, January 5th at 3 p.m. But I do hope you'll do that. I think you'll find that the information will be helpful and can really help guide you as you begin your preparations for the bar in 2017. Well, I'd like to jump into my thought for today. As I've been talking to students over the holiday weekend, I've been thinking a lot about how people prepare and actually take the test. And one of the common themes I hear from students is that they say something to the effect of, I'm really trying to bear down and learn all of the material. I don't want to miss anything. I want to be as thoroughly prepared as I can. I want to have the material really soaking into my brain and really knowing everything, or knowing as much as I can. And that is really commendable. I think that is an awesome approach to take. I think it's a great mental approach where someone says, you know what, I just want to learn as much as I possibly can. And I don't want to discourage anyone from doing that. On the other hand, it's been my experience over 25 years that no one learns everything. No one even comes close to learning everything, nor is it necessary. But that the people who are most successful on the bar are the people that work intuitively. They work from their common sense and from their non-conscious brain more than their conscious brain. And I've tried to explain that in a lot of different contexts, but the thought came to me the other day that it's a little bit like going to a casino. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever been in a casino, but I'm guessing that most of you at least are familiar with them from TVs and movies, if you haven't actually been in one yourself. And one of the truisms of the casino industry, I'm told, is that the house never loses. That makes sense. If you look at some of those casinos in Las Vegas, it's pretty clear that somebody had to lose in order to pay for all that stuff. But here's what I mean specifically and how it relates to the bar exam. When you go to a casino, let's say you're a blackjack player, there was a time when casinos, I'm told, basically played with a single deck of cards or maybe two decks of cards. And you could count the cards if you were smart enough and dedicated enough. You could actually figure out and see what cards were being played, and you could count the cards. And for a short period of time, you probably could play and beat the house odds at that particular game. Well, as time and circumstance would have it, the casinos got smarter and they said, you know what? I think that what we're going to do is we're going to go from 2 decks up to maybe 6 decks, and then ultimately to 8 decks. And then they started using something called a shoe. It's a way of dealing where the cards get shuffled and they cut a certain number of cards even out of that. And then they went to automatic shuffle machines so that the cards were constantly being shuffled. Now imagine 8 decks where the cards are constantly being shuffled, and then they add alcohol and music and distraction and crazy. And really, you're going to count cards? I mean, there might be a handful, and I mean literally a handful of people that could do it, but most regular human beings are not going to be able to do that. All right, so is the bar exam like a casino? Well, kind of. And here's what I mean, specifically when it comes to the multi-state exam. The multi-state bar examiners have gotten more and more sophisticated with every administration of the exam. I've said elsewhere that I don't think the exam is necessarily harder, but I will say that it's become considerably more sophisticated over the years. There was a time when the MBE first came out when I think it was reasonable to look at a multi-state question and look at the 4 answer choices, and you would almost immediately be able to say, there's 1 or 2 of these choices that I can eliminate right off the top. They're just absolutely wrong. And then you could begin to eliminate and look at the nuances and figure out what the right answer would be. Now, the people that did that most successfully were people that were able to figure out sort of the way the examiners thought about it, what elements of law, what rules they were working with. And for a long time, the theory was that if you had more time than 3 hours to do 100 questions, using that approach, you could ultimately be successful. And I think that was true. If you had 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 hours, you could absolutely figure out most multi-state questions, at least in the early days of the test. But that wasn't really a satisfactory solution for either bar takers or the bar examiners. And so what the bar examiners started doing was creating questions in which the subtleties between the answer choices were narrower and narrower. It wasn't so obvious as to right or wrong answers anymore, or between right or wrong outcomes. More information turned on a word or a phrase. But even at that, if you knew what that word or phrase was, if you knew what the limiting words in an answer were or in a question, you had a reasonable chance of being successful. And we saw that most people, up until about 5 or 6 years ago, were still passing the multi-state bar exam. Across the country, most bar takers were passing. Well, as you've heard me talk about, and as we've seen in the statistics, fewer and fewer people are passing the multi-state bar exam. In fact, the median numbers, the average score on the multi-state, has continued to decline. And in 2016, it was at its lowest levels ever. Now, why is that? Well, in my view, it's primarily because the questions have now become so finely tuned, so clearly detailed in a way that you can no longer brute force your way through the question. You can no longer count the cards and look at the question and figure out exactly what the examiners had in mind and eliminate wrong answers and do all of that in 3 hours on 100 questions and get the required number of questions right to pass. Well, I know some of you are saying, well, wait, a lot of people still pass. What do they do? Well, interestingly enough, I think what most of them do, consciously or unconsciously, is that they go with their gut reaction, their instinct, their intuition. Even when they tell you that they're figuring out the answers, that's really just a way of saying, I have a feeling about which answer is correct. Very few people, even those that get very high multi-state scores, leave the exam saying, I know I got those questions correct. In fact, most people, even the ones that we've talked to and the students that we've interviewed from our course who've done extremely well in the top 2 or 3% of the multi-state, have said, I didn't know if I passed or failed based on really how I felt about the questions at the time. You see, the point was you could no longer look at an MBE question and say, well, that's obviously the answer and here's why, and be confident in that on 80 or 90 questions out of 100. So how do you pass the multi-state? Well, this is going to really throw some of you for a loop, but this is what we've discovered over the past few years, really unfailingly. And that is that when people take their time in reading the question and reading the answer choices, but then decide on the answer choice immediately, when they guess, for lack of a better word, they're successful on the bar. They're successful on the multi-state. And you say, well, how could guessing be more successful? Well, it's not really guessing. It's really taking all of the work and learning that you've done, the reading, the lectures, the practice questions that you've done, certainly if you're in our course, and taking that information and storing it intuitively in your non-conscious brain. If you're trying to remember your mnemonics and your outlines and all of the rules and all of the elements for all 7 subjects, and then recall those on test day under the pressure of the test in a 3-hour time frame, statistically what we know is that you're not going to do particularly well. And in fact, it's going to be really close to failing, if not outright failing, on the multi-state. That strategy simply doesn't work anymore. You can't beat the house. Not in the long run, not consistently. So who beats the house? Well, the people that go in and relax and think through what they're doing in the sense of, I'm going to read the question carefully so I don't miss words or ideas, and I'm going to read each answer choice carefully so that I don't immediately dismiss an answer choice out of hand. But I'm going to make a quick decision once I've read all 4 answer choices. That person consistently does well on the bar exam, and particularly on the multi-state. But this is even true on states that have multiple choice tests like Florida. So the concept here is that as you're studying today, and we're about 60 days until the next bar exam, my advice to all of you is don't spend so much time trying to learn all of the nuances, all of the details. You won't be able to recall that information on the bar when you would typically need it. And even if you did, it would be so difficult to apply it to a multi-state fact pattern and the set of choices that ultimately you would either slow yourself down so much that you end up having to guess or just Christmas tree or mark 5 or 10 answers at the end because you never got to them, which really negates the effect of getting those other harder questions correct, or you simply can't get enough questions done that way to be successful. So what we encourage you to do is to read and practice and listen to lectures as you're studying, but to practice multi-state questions by working intuitively, by just taking your best guess. Now, when you take your best guess in practice, if you're in our course, what you're going to do right after you've answered a question is to look at the answer choice explanations. And whether you got that answer correct or incorrect, at least in our course, you're going to immediately be looking at the explanations. So you end up in the same spot whether your guess was right or wrong. But here's what I discovered. When students started guessing, and I'm using that term obviously in the loosest sense because it's not a real guess, it's an informed guess, if you will. But when students started guessing on their responses, they started getting more of them correct. As they got more correct, they got more confidence. As they got more confidence, they ended up with greater and greater results. Now, for our students that use photo reading, which is the non-conscious method of reading that we employ, it's about 25,000 words a minute of reading with about 70% comprehension. We ask them to run a test, a hypothetical, at some point in their studies. And here's how that hypothetical goes. We ask students to first just take a set of 25 multi-state questions, not having done the reading, not having listened to the lectures, but take those questions cold and answer them and record their scores. Don't look at the answer explanations, just record the scores. Then we ask them to photo read the material and take the 25 questions again. Now, if you're not a photo reader, the way you do this is you do the 25 questions cold, and then you go back and do your reading in whatever way you read. And take the same 25 questions again, and don't look at the answer explanations, just score yourself. Did I get them right or wrong? You'll see that your score has gone up. If you're a photo reader, you'll see your score actually going up pretty dramatically. Then we have you do the same test one more time. This time, photo read or read, and then listen to the lecture. In other words, activate the material, go through that part of the learning process. Now go back to those same 25 questions, and again, all you've done before was to just mark if they were right or wrong. You didn't figure out what the correct answer was, so you didn't know that answer number 1 was D. You just know you missed it or you got it right going forward. So it's good to have somebody else actually do the scoring for you and give it back to you and tell you your results. But in any event, when people did these 3 steps of reading and lecture and then answered the questions intuitively, the scores really, really jumped. In fact, I had a student who recently reported to us on our Facebook group that she did a group of 30 questions, and her first try, I think she got 14 or 15 correct, and then she got about 18 or 19 correct. And then on the third try, when she did the reading and the lectures and answered the questions intuitively, she got 30 out of 30 correct. Now, that's extraordinary to get them all right, but I see people consistently getting 20 out of 25 or 25 out of 30 correct when they're answering questions this way. So, the moral of the story is, if you've been trying, or if your plan is to outwork and outthink and outguess the bar examiners, my intuition, I guess, my gut reaction is that's probably not going to work. You're probably going to be frustrated, certainly during your studies. You're going to be scared and anxious on the bar exam day, none of which is good. And you're not likely to be successful ultimately, or at least as successful as you should be, given the amount of work that you've put in. The better approach is to study progressively. That is, to do the reading or photo reading, then to do the lectures, then to do practice questions in stepped repetition. A few questions, wait a few days, do a few more questions, wait a few days, do a few more, and so on. If you're in our course, that's already built in to the syllabus and the study guide. But in any event, as you learn those materials, you then become confident in your understanding intuitively of what's going on. On test day, then when the question banks are open to you and the book is open, you take question 1, you read it carefully and slowly. You read all 4 answer choices carefully and slowly, and then you make an instant choice. And then you go on. You don't go back to it, you don't review it, you don't change it, you don't try to figure out what was the distractor, or can I eliminate an answer choice, or what are the rules, or what are the elements. You don't do any of that. Now, one of the really cool parts of this is that if you're following this approach, you can actually finish 100 questions in 2.5 hours or less. In fact, I've had people report back to me that they've been finished in 1 hour and 45 minutes. It's certainly possible to do that, and with good scores. So the great part is you're not as fatigued as everyone else. You're really functioning intuitively, which is allowing your non-conscious brain, which is where all of this information is stored. Everything that you've learned from law school, from the bar review, from your life, from your practice of law, if you're already in the profession, all of that information is there. The interesting part is that almost none of it's in your conscious brain. And so we don't want you to rely on your conscious brain. We don't want you to count cards. We don't want you to try and outsmart the house. It just doesn't work. The house is too smart, they're too successful, and they've learned how to beat the people that are trying to count the cards, if you will, the mnemonics players, the memorizers, the flashcard creators. You know who you are if you're in that group. So that's my advice for you today as we turn the corner heading towards the February exam. If you're taking that test in a couple of months, don't put your time into memorization. Don't spend your time when you're doing practice questions trying to figure out how to eliminate wrong answers and narrow down the answers. Don't do any of that. Just take your best guess and look at the results. And when you do that, what you're going to discover, to your surprise, is, wow, I get more questions right this way than when I'm actually working and trying to figure it out. See, that's the weird part. You know, in a casino, they talk about beginner's luck. I think part of what that is, particularly at blackjack, is that people don't know enough to make decisions. So they just go with their intuition. They just do what seems right to them. And for a short while, typically that works pretty well. Well, all it's got to do for you in the bar exam is to work one day with 200 questions. That's all. It's actually just that simple. And if you make it more complicated and more difficult, if you try against the odds to figure out everything that's going on, to know all the rules, all the elements, all the pieces, really, I think at the end of the day, you're going to be disappointed, you're going to be frustrated, and you're going to be discouraged because the results won't be what you had expected. Now, I know that all of that's pretty controversial stuff, but if you'd like to see how that's worked out for our students, I invite you to check out the Hangouts that we've been doing on this podcast, but also on our website. You can go to our website and you'll see a link at the top for testimonials and case studies. There are, I think, over 30-some video interviews, but also lots of comments from past students. And you'll see a consistent theme from those folks that they use this intuitive approach to being successful, as uncomfortable and different as it felt to them when they were doing it initially. So I really encourage you to try that. If you're in our course, we'll be talking more and more about that as we go along. But I wanted to share that with our entire audience today because I think it's so very important in this process of studying and getting ready. Can you succeed on the multi-state? Absolutely. Absolutely. Can you raise your score on the multi-state even if you've taken it previously? Absolutely. We see students jumping 15 to 20 scale points. Well, we think photo reading is a big part of that. So if you're in our course, by all means, if you've not signed up for photo reading, make sure that you talk to us about it. We think it makes a big difference. But for everyone that's listening, whether you're a photo reader or a regular reader, you can improve your score just by being intuitive. So I encourage you to do that and wish you great luck on the exam and great success on the exam. We'll be bringing you more exam tips over the next couple of months as we get closer to the exam. But I thought this was a good one to start off 2017. Well, that's it for today's message. We've got a few concluding words for you, and we'll see you again next week on the Extra Mile and hopefully on the pass list very soon. Well, that's our episode for today. Thanks so much for joining me and for being part of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. Now, if you'd like to catch up on prior episodes or check out the show notes, you can do that by going to our webpage at celebrationbarreview.com. Click on the link at the top of the page for podcasts, and there you'll find all of our previous episodes as well as the show notes. You can also subscribe to the podcast from that site, or you can go to iTunes and subscribe there. Just type in the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers, and you can subscribe and be part of the podcast series. And we would love to have you do that. While you're on the iTunes site, we would also really appreciate you giving us a quick, honest rating and review. That feedback is really useful to me as I prepare these episodes. It only takes about 30 seconds, so I hope you'll do that. Just type in the name of the podcast and give us your rating and review. Again, if you've got any questions or you'd like to know anything else about Celebration Bar Review or the courses that we offer, visit our website, or I invite you to contact us. My email is jackson@celebrationbarreview.com, and I look forward to hearing from you and to seeing you along the extra mile very shortly. See you on the pass list. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.